I never imagined a moment like this would happen to me. The surgeon didn't even look at me. He closed my son's file with a flick of his wrist, barely glancing at the charts, barely glancing at the monitor showing Ethan's fragile heartbeat. "I won't touch this case," he said, his voice cold, final. Just like that, he walked away. My son, 10 years old, was hooked to monitors, tubes snaking in and out, his small chest rising and falling faster than it should. And I stood there, frozen, staring at a man who could save my child but had chosen not to, and I asked myself, why? But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. Have you ever been in a situation where every second matters and yet the person who holds the power over life and death refuses to act? That's exactly where I was. Every parent knows that feeling, that unbearable tension when you're waiting for someone else to do the impossible. But what made this worse wasn't just fear. It was recognition. Dr. Victor Haynes, one of the most feared and brilliant surgeons in the country, froze the instant he saw my name on the file. And in that instant, everything changed. Ethan was watching me. Even in his weak, fragile state, he knew something was wrong. His small hands clutched the edge of his bed, eyes wide, searching mine for answers I didn't have. You try to stay strong for your child, but in moments like these, fear gnaws at your bones. I felt it twisting me from the inside out. The beeping of the monitors seemed louder somehow, each pulse a reminder that time was slipping away. I stepped forward, instinct driving me more than reason, and the nurse, quiet, calm, always observant, did something that made my heart pound even faster. She locked the door behind me. It was a small, subtle action, but it made the room feel like a pressure cooker. There was no turning back now. And I just knew, that what I was about to say could either save my son or ruin everything. Then I said the words. One sentence. One simple, impossibly small sequence of words that somehow carried the weight of a decade of history, fear, and unresolved conflict. And the room froze. The surgeon's eyes widened, the air itself seemed to thicken, and I realized in that moment that nothing in my life had prepared me for what was coming next. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Have you ever been completely powerless in a room where every second counts? That's what it felt like as Dr. Haynes stared at me, his eyes narrowing, jaw tight, then finally, with a slow shake of his head, he closed the file. Just like that. No explanation. No glance at my son's monitors. No concern for the oxygen levels creeping lower. Just refusal. And I couldn't understand why. I tried to speak. Words caught in my throat. My mind raced. I had spent months gathering every record, every scan, every specialist note. Every detail meticulously organized. And yet, in one gesture, he dismissed it all. My son was 10 years old. Hooked to life support. Watching me. Did he even care? Or was this something else? Time seemed to stretch unnaturally. I watched him, the man who could save my child, silently judging. And I realized something terrifying. This wasn't about the medical charts. It wasn't about Ethan. It was about me. But why? What could I have done, decades ago, that mattered more than my child's life right now? I glanced down at Ethan, pale and trembling. His small hand twitched as if begging me to fix this. My heart raced. Have you ever felt that helplessness, knowing that your child is counting on you, and yet the solution is being denied for reasons you don't understand? That was me, frozen in the middle of a corridor that felt smaller by the second. Every beep from the monitors was a countdown. Then a thought hit me. Something from long ago, a memory of Dr. Haynes in residency, a confrontation I had buried and tried to forget. The way he had glared at me. The words he had said. And suddenly, the refusal made sense. It wasn't about the surgery. It was about revenge, pride, a grudge carried for 20 years. I swallowed hard. Every instinct screamed at me to turn and leave, but I couldn't. Ethan's life depended on it. I took a deep breath and stepped closer. The nurse's hand on the door handle, quietly turning the lock, made the air feel even heavier. And in that charged silence, I knew I had to speak. But what I said next, no one could have expected. Why would a brilliant surgeon risk his reputation to hold a grudge? That question pounded in my mind as I stood there, heart racing, Ethan's small hand barely holding mine. I had thought the past was behind me, buried under years of routine and responsibility, but apparently, some grudges are like ghosts, patient, lingering, waiting for the right moment. And this was that moment. 20 years ago, Dr. Victor Haynes and I had been colleagues during our residency. He was brilliant, yes, but competitive in a way that made everyone uneasy. I had challenged him on a research project once, questioned a method, pointed out a flaw in his data. At the time, I thought it was nothing more than academic tension. But I had been wrong. Haynes never forgot. He seethed silently for years, quietly sabotaging opportunities, always watching, always waiting. I had tried to forgive, tried to move on, but apparently, the memory of that confrontation had followed me like a shadow, now manifesting in the most terrifying way, in my son's life. I looked at Ethan's monitors, the numbers flickering, reminding me that time didn't wait for grudges. His tiny chest rose and fell unevenly, a rhythm that had always been steady now jagged, unpredictable. Every parent knows that feeling. When your instincts scream at you to act, but the world around you refuses to move. How had a past rivalry brought me here, at the edge of losing my child? I asked him directly, even though my voice trembled, why? Why are you doing this? His lips pressed into a thin line. His eyes betrayed a flicker of something, anger, regret, pride, or all three. I realized then that Ethan's survival wasn't just about medicine. It was about history, about unresolved conflicts that had nothing to do with him. And then it hit me, I could use that history. I could reach him, remind him of who we were, of the years, of the choices we had made. Could I turn a decades-old rivalry into leverage? Could I convince the man who refused to save my child that he was facing someone who wouldn't back down? I inhaled sharply, glancing down at Ethan. His small eyes met mine, trusting me utterly. I knew what I had to do. I had to say the sentence that would cut through the tension, the fear, and the pride, the sentence that would force him to act. But as I opened my mouth, I realized that the words I was about to speak could change everything, and once spoken, there would be no turning back. The room went silent. Even the machines seemed to pause, their beeping reduced to a dull, suspended hum. I could feel the weight of every second pressing down on me. Ethan's small hand still held mine, fragile and trembling, and I realized that everything, every fear, every mistake, every unspoken word from the past, had led to this moment. Could one sentence really change the course of all of this? I stepped closer to Dr. Haynes, forcing my voice to remain steady despite the adrenaline surging through me. Victor, I said, just one word at first, and it made him flinch. Victor, listen, this isn't about us anymore. This is about him. My voice cracked slightly, but I held his gaze. The tension between us was electric, a charge that seemed almost visible in the air. For a moment, he didn't respond. His jaw clenched, and I could see every muscle in his face tightening as if he were fighting a war inside himself. And in that pause, I realized something shocking. For all his reputation, all his brilliance, all his ego, he hesitated. He hesitated because I had forced the past and the present to collide, because I had reminded him that this wasn't just about pride, but about a 10-year-old boy who had no part in our history. I glanced at Ethan, who was watching me, wide-eyed and trusting. Could he sense the tension? Could he feel that the balance of life and death had shifted with a single sentence? I pressed on, choosing words carefully, deliberately. If you don't act, he dies. And it won't matter who's right or wrong. Years from now, no one will remember us. But they will remember if you saved him or let him go. Something in Dr. Haynes' expression changed. The cold, unyielding wall of pride began to crack. He swallowed hard, his hands curling into fists at his sides. For a heartbeat, the room seemed suspended, time itself holding its breath. Then he muttered, almost inaudibly, "You're right. Let's proceed." I didn't know if relief or fear surged stronger in me at that moment. The surgery could still fail. But I knew this, the first, hardest barrier had fallen. He had agreed to act. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that this confrontation, this collapse of years-old tension, had unleashed something far bigger than just a surgery. Something unpredictable. Something that could change everything, in ways we hadn't even imagined. The operating room smelled of antiseptic and tension. Machines hummed, monitors beeped steadily, and I held Ethan's small hand as the anesthesia took hold. His eyes, still wide and trusting, flicked toward me one last time. "Mom," he whispered weakly, and I squeezed his hand, promising silently that I wouldn't let him go. Every parent knows that moment, when your child's life is no longer just their own, but in your hands entirely. And every parent knows that fear, that helplessness, like standing on the edge of a cliff with no safety net. The surgeons moved with precision. Every motion was calculated, deliberate. I watched Dr. Haynes at the head of the table, the same man who had refused me moments ago, now entirely focused, his pride set aside, or perhaps transformed into something sharper, more dangerous. I couldn't help but think, how thin the line is between brilliance and arrogance, between life and death. One sentence, one confrontation, and suddenly the impossible was possible. Minutes stretched like hours. I felt every heartbeat, every monitor spike, every small movement in the OR as if it were my own. And yet, through it all, I realized something profound: the battles we think are over rarely are. They linger, hiding beneath the surface, in grudges, regrets, and unspoken words. Sometimes, confronting them isn't a choice, it's survival. And sometimes, it takes more than logic, more than skill, it takes courage, honesty, and the willingness to speak the words that could save a life. Then the head nurse looked up, her eyes flicking toward me. A subtle nod. Ethan was stable. His vitals normalized. Relief, sharp and overwhelming, hit me all at once, a wave I had been holding back for hours. I felt his small chest rise steadily, a rhythm I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath for. And I knew, in that moment, that what I had said, what I had risked, had worked. But I also knew that the past wasn't entirely gone. Dr. Haynes' eyes met mine briefly. Respect, acknowledgement, and a quiet question: would the shadow of old rivalries truly vanish, or was it simply lying dormant, waiting for the next spark? As I finally stepped away from the table, letting the staff take over, I glanced down at Ethan. Weak, fragile, but alive. And I whispered to myself, to him, to the universe, one sentence changed everything. One moment of courage, one confrontation, one choice. What would you do if your child's life depended on facing your past?